So we are following a tradition of Merlam festival, which is about more than 600 years old. And as part of this ceremony, we have the storytelling from the Jataka Mala. So we are doing that today. 92.3, 92.3, 92.3. Yes. It's Heart Sutra. The Dalai Lama Shinga Tomba Namba to Tene Sanjay to Sedam Shari Birch and Josan Basan Bachambo Papa Jeres and Wanchola take a meso, Kipo, Kanola Sherab Kiparo, Chimpa Samaja Baja, but the Gajam about Josan Basan Bachambo Papa Jeres. Sharon to the Poland Degage Meso, Sharon Borigapom, Nigapoma, Kanala, Sherab Gaparo, the Chamber, Samaja Baja, but the vision, but the watcher, the Bomb about the Dalai, Rashinga, Domba, Namba, Yanda Barjo. So Domba, so Sola, Domba, Shema, Domba, Legends, Shema, notation to throw out to ship. Number Shebanum, Domba, Shereba, the Bani, the Singing Meba, Majeba, Maga, Batima, Meba, Timada, English translation is 92.3. America Major Meadow Mega Comebani, you come number ship back on Yabardon, Meadow, Mariba, Mariba, Seba, Mebana, Kashimiko, Shesebe, Bardon. The Shindo Donga, Wada Conjon, Wada Gobada, Lame, Shime, Toba Mem, Shereba, the Davana, Jason, Shera Yavarada, Chimbala, then somebody by Major Taba made the Chinjilo, Leshindo, the Nanyagale, the better. There's some number Shubas on Jetam Jason, Sherab Yaparo, Chimbala, then. Yang dapat coba cenjo dong, dapat coba sang jesu. Tapi nak syarat dia perlu do cimbenga, ribu cimbenga, lada mebenga, minyak badanya. Tungai tam syarat do syarat cimbenga, cimbenga dem basya bercakap syarat dia perlu do cimbenga, mebate atha, gade para sang gade bodhis. Ribu cenjo sembah cimbe, do syarat dia perlu do cimbenga. Samula la bercakap tene jom de tinggi zeteleshin. Bawa cenjo sang wanjong, Rigabo de Deshin or Rigabo de Deshin de Chita, Chuga, Dembashin, do Sherab Yaparo, Chimba, Samola, Chebercha, the Hinshabanam Janjasu. The Gajaka, and Sedan, Damba, Sharon, do Dipo, Josen, Bosson, Bachimbo, Pavach, and Reson, one Joe, Natam Jeda, Dembacor, the Dada, Hadam. Tizarjabeji, the Iran, the Chimden, the Yasung Bala, one Baratu. Nesum country sola. So, Samara Shedder, Samaraya Peg, Samara Shedder, Samaraya Peg. Okay, Samara Shedder, Samaraya Peg, Samara Shedder, Samaraya. Okay, Samara Shedder, Samaraya Peg, okay, Samara Shedder, Samaraya Peg. God, the Paraga, the Parasanga, the body so I should. But then, Virgin, cheer, the over, never to show. Kumbe to walk on as Marisha, Shishin Sibe, to Shaget over the local the Sege, Choke, the walking, could not make the mission. Mibum Jambeon, like charts. Give Jishin combated some link and Ludo Tomachin, so now you also Chabesho, like charts. This is a prayer to the lineage masters of Lamrim. They allow du Shin Tumbe Shabla, Charts, Bodo one, and Jessica Combestion. Pujon one, just from last charts. You did the walking. Zonga, what do you want to get the Yeah, this on the jazz. Nimba Tobe, John of Kun. Sian Chuji Shablaku, Charles, Nujition Bird, Shaggy, Shuji, Shamako Chatsu. Jibji Shabla, Charles. Tawe Mikke San Taba Drube Chungo Chu Tsebe Kube Tabge Zeba Isuzu Shunyanam Future. There's a mandala offering.
Yöne 야, 당연하죠.
So for any kind of Dharma discourse, in order for it to be effective from the side of the teacher, one must not have the 8 worldly concerns, but be sincere in benefiting others. and then teach with such motivation, and from the side of the listeners, audience, one's thoughts should not be mixed with concerns for this life's cold clothes, shelter, and fame. It's not right to have such motivation when you listen to teachings. It is best if you have the motivation to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings, and dedicate to your life throughout your lifetimes and make it meaningful for the benefit of others. At the least, in order to practice the Buddhism, which teaches there of a liberation and nirvana, which has to do with attainment in your mind, which means having overcome all the suffering and its causes from the mind stream. So such a state where you have eliminated all the causes of suffering and suffering is called nirvana. And in order to reach that, you have the practices of the three trainings, such as concentration, single-pointedness of mind, and also understanding the nature of reality as it is. So such practice is what we call Buddhism. And then there is the practice of avoiding or abstaining from the 10 non-virtuous actions. Of course, each of the different religious traditions have their own ways of avoiding the practice of avoiding the negative actions. So the 10 non-virtuous actions, abstaining from the 10 non-virtuous actions, is something which is common to all the different traditions, religious traditions. Of course, even in national law, government national law, it's against the law to kill, steal, or say conducting sexual misconduct, and so forth. So these are common to all traditions. But when it comes to Buddhism, the practice is aimed at reaching nirvana or liberation. And so dharma or chu in Tibetan is something which is freedom from, it's a peace, which is the freedom from that of desire. So desire is the root of suffering, and which in turn is rooted in the ignorance. So overcoming the suffering, which is the peace you attain in mind. So Buddhism is primarily about reaching this peace of nirvana. So whatever practice you do within the context of Buddhism, all of them are meant for attaining this peace of nirvana. Jamyang Shepa says that in Buddhism, what is rejected is that of independently existing self or Atma, which distinguishes it from the non-Buddhist traditions. When it comes to philosophical view, the traditions which teach Atma or soul theory makes this the grasping at self firmer within oneself, such as asserting that of a permanent unitary substantial independent or autonomous self that are taught in the non-Buddhist traditions. But Buddhism shows a path which goes against this kind of theory, which is to say that it teaches the practice of cultivating the view that goes against such distorted views. Of course, the practices such as compassion, love, and so forth, and also single-pointed concentration are there even in the non-Buddhist traditions. Now, the unique feature of Buddhism is that of the understanding of selflessness. So it is taught only in Buddhism, and therefore, in order to understand Buddhism well, you have to understand that of selflessness, through which you will gain a good insight into what liberation or nirvana means. And so, in order for this teaching that you listen to become a Buddhism, you have to understand that of the Dharma. You have to have some understanding of what the nirvana or the peace of nirvana means. It would be best if you could, as I said earlier, to cultivate good heart, from life to life, and dedicate yourself until you reach enlightenment to cultivate this good heart and benefit others throughout your lifetimes. So with such an aim and goal, you should listen to the Dharma. From the side of the Lama even. So from the side of the Lama even, one should not think of gaining fame by giving teachings, and also look for praises from people. So although if the Lama has such a motivation, although he may be teaching the Dharma, he's creating negative karma based on the Dharma. Therefore, Buddhism, when we talk of taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we are distinguishing Buddhism from the non-Buddhist traditions. And so the purpose of Buddhism is to reach the nirvana, and for that reason you take refuge in the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then the path that distinguishes the Mahayana from the lower path is that of Bodhichitta, the altruistic intention to become enlightened or Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. So when we say that a verse, taking refuge in Bodhichitta, think like this. I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and I am enlightened. May the merit that I gain from listening to this teaching, may I dedicate it for reaching Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. There is a tradition in the of some Kham lamas when they give teachings. They say some verses of praise to the Buddha, and so according to Kulu Lama Rinpoche, who was from whom I have received many teachings, he had been to Kham, and whenever he gave teachings, every day he said different verses. So, of course, I do not know many different verses to recite like him, but I usually recite the verse from Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika at the end of the text, where it says, embraced by compassion or infused by compassion, you taught the holy Dharma in order to do away with wrong or misconceptions. As I said earlier, today, about 600 years ago, Jamgon Lama Tsongkhapa, or the great master Tsongkhapa, started this Mönlam prayer festival at Lhasa Cathedral, Jo Shakyamuni Cathedral in Lhasa, where he made vast offerings to the Buddha in Jokang, and made prayers for the spread of the Dharma and for the well-being of sentient beings. and he started this Mönlam prayer festival. Since then, there was a time when the Mönlam festival couldn't be held. And then the second Dalai Lama, Gentun Gyatso, revived this tradition. And since then, it has been held regularly. Until 1959, it was held in Tibet regularly, every year. Then after 1959, the previous Panchen Rinpoche also held this bear festival in Tibet. In central Tibet, the great monastic centers of learning and other monasteries everywhere in Tibet. There has been great destruction. There were in certain monasteries, there were only the caretakers of the temples, and therefore there was a problem. Since we came into exile in India, we have been holding this Mönlam festival in India. And especially during the Mönlam prayer festival, the Geshe examinations have been held, which is the main thing. And in order to commemorate the Buddha, this Mönlam prayer festival is incepted by Lama Tsongkhapa. And especially on this 15th full moon day, we have this tradition of reading the Jataka stories. Usually after the Tibetan Mönlam prayer festival, I give teachings during the spring teaching. Of course, when I had more time in the past, I used to give teachings for 2 weeks and so on. But since then, I've become more busier. I've been giving teachings in Bodh Gaya or Varanasi and so forth, and and so here many people have gathered, lay people as well as monks and nuns, and especially people from Tibet. So the main audience for this teaching, I consider the people from Tibet, who represent the majority of Tibetans inside Tibet. For over 1,000 years, Buddhism spread in Tibet, flourished in Tibet. Buddhism is something very authentic. The Buddhism that we have is an authentic tradition. It came to Tibet from India by Abbot Chandarakshita, who was a great crown jewel of the scholars of Nalanda University. He also started his own Madhyamaka philosophical tradition. So amongst the great Nalanda scholars, he was a unique scholar who started his own Madhyamaka tradition. And he also wrote texts such as the Ornament of Madhyamaka, and also the Dosamgraha. So it showed that he was a really great scholar. Besides that, Guru Padmasambhava, who's really kind to Tibetans. also came to Tibet at that time. They were contemporaries. So Shantarakshita took the responsibility to spread the Vinaya tradition, starting the monastic tradition in Tibet, and Padmasambhava helped in overcoming the obstacles to this venture. And also including the Tibetan king, Trisong Detsen, there were really few disciples of Guru Padmasambhava to whom he gave tantric teachings in a secret way. Not only that, he also, intending to benefit sentient beings in the future, he hid many Dharma teachings. So both of these great masters were invited to Tibet by the Tibetan Emperor Trisong Detsen. So we call these three people as Ken Lop Chösung, which is the abbot, the master, and the Dharma king. So it was in the 8th century when they met in Tibet. So Tibetan Buddhism is a complete set of Buddhism with the teachings of Hinayana, Mahayana, including the Vajrayana. So it was started and established in Tibet by a great master, Madhyamaka master, who was also a great logician, Guru Abbot Shantarakshita. So therefore it's quite natural that since the teacher himself was a great authentic master, highly learned, his disciples also, whether they can do it or not, should follow his tradition. So over the last 1,000 years, whether it's within in the Nyingma tradition or which is called the old translation tradition or the new translation tradition, including Kadam and down to the Chonang traditions, all of these Tibetan Buddhist traditions follow the tradition of Abbot Shantarakshita, which is to say that they study the great classical texts of Buddhism for over 20 to 30 years. And they study all these great classic texts word by word and do lots of critical analysis using that of logic. And so through such effort, Buddhism has survived in Tibet. And therefore, today in the world, the complete teaching of Buddhism, including the Hinayana, Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, where the base is the path and the fruition are taught and practiced, such a Buddhism is only that of Tibetan Buddhism. But in Burma, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Cambodia, and other regions, they study the Pali tradition of Buddhism, and they have really good practice of Vinaya, or moral code of conduct of monks and nuns. And they also have the study of concentrations and the form and formless realms, which are studied in really great detail, unlike we have. Of course, they do not have the logic and epistemological studies. And then in China, Vietnam, Korea, Japan, in these countries, the Purjaparamita texts are studied, which are Mahayana teachings, but they do not have very detailed or extensive study of logic and epistemology. And even with regard to Madhyamaka studies, they do not. The main text for establishing the view or philosophical view of Nagarjuna through critical analysis is one of the main texts by Indian masters is that of Chandrakirti's Prasanapada, or clear words, which is I was trying to study it. So the Prasanapada is one of the main texts which comment on the philosophical view of thought of Nagarjuna, is this one. And also, so this doesn't seem, the tradition of studying this text doesn't seem to be there in these countries, and also they don't seem to have this tradition of studying that of logic and epistemology extensively. So, but we in Tibetan Buddhism have this tradition of studying these texts. Year after year, people study these texts over a decade or more. And then Buddhism, of course, with Tantric tradition of Buddhism spread to China, and from there to Japan and other countries. Of course, there are people who do not practice Tantra in these countries, but the Tantric tradition that they have the three lower tantras, but not the highest yoga tantra. But in Tibetan Buddhism, we have all the four sets of tantra, including the Anuttara Yoga Tantra. In the Nyingma tradition, they talk about the three external sets of teachings, but the three internal sets of teachings are only seems to not be there in the other countries, but only in Tibet. And from Tibet, this Tibetan Buddhism spread to Mongolia, including the Russian republics of Buryat and Kalmyk and Tuva. Of course, there have been great destruction in these places, countries. And also in the Himalayan regions in India, the Buddhism spread from Tibet. So we have, they share the same Tibetan Buddhist tradition. But with regard to studying the Dharma, it seems the Tibetans have done the best so far. Even if we are in exile, we still have kept up with the study of the Dharma, the extensive study of the Dharma. And people from the Himalayan regions and other countries come to the great monastic centers of learning to study Buddhism. So the complete teaching of the Buddha is kept alive by Tibetan exiles. I'm not boasting about it. We not only kept it alive, but we have been doing studies of these. So Benjamin Lobsang Gyen, in his writings, calls himself Gyen Kampa, someone who visited different places. So it seems I am also like him, Gyen Kampa. I'm being invited by different people in different countries, and they say they are going to meet all the expenses, so why not go? If I didn't accept the invitation, I would be foolish. So by visiting different countries, I gain lots of friends, and I do my best to sincerely share with them. Learn from them what we don't have. I learn from them, and I try to share what we have to them. So it's been 50 years since I came into exile. So that's why I see how pure tradition of Buddhism, the complete teaching of the Buddha, we have. And this tradition of Buddhism that we have came from the Nalanda tradition. When Buddha first started giving teachings, he gave teaching on the Four Noble Truths, uttering the Four Noble Truths from the point of view of their nature and their function and their fruition. So when Buddha gave teaching on the Four Noble Truths, first he showed the nature of the Four Noble Truths, which is showing the basis, or teaching the basis. And then in the second uttering of the Four Noble Truths, he taught how to engage in the practice with regard to the Four Noble Truths. And then in the third utterance of the Four Noble Truths, which is utterance with regard to fruition, he showed the result of your practice. So when I discuss I have discussions with scientists, we can learn about physical things, about physics and so forth, from the scientists in great detail. They have really extensive explanation of the physical nature of things. In our text, of course, there are usage of masters have used that of logic to establish the nature of things. But the science establishes the things based on experiment. And therefore, they are really we can believe in them better. And so there are lots of things that we can learn as Buddhists from the scientists. But when it comes to learning or knowing about the internal world of mind or psychology, the scientists can learn more from the Asian traditions, and particularly the Buddhism, where mind is dealt with in great detail, and therefore we can share with the scientists, the Western scientists. And therefore today, many Western scientists are taking great interest in Buddhist psychology and the presentation of mind, and they're very happy to do that. So within Buddhism, I usually make three categories. There's the which are that of the nature of things at the basis level. And since we all do not want suffering but want happiness, of course, suffering do not come from without any causes. The suffering is not causeless. It doesn't come from any permanent causes, but they come from their own respective causes and conditions. And so the different from amongst the different religious traditions, Buddhism and Jainism base their teachings on the teaching of causality, where a permanent creator God is not accepted. In Jainism, when it comes to that of doer of an action and also enjoyer of a fruit, they again they have the theory of Atma, which creates things and enjoys the fruits. Whereas, and that's why it doesn't become a complete philosophical thought with regard to causality. Whereas in Buddhism, we do not accept an Atma. Everything comes in relation, dependent on causes and conditions. And we also teach that of selflessness or no self nature of things. So things, the Buddhism teaches that of interdependent nature of things, which is unique to Buddhism. No other tradition teaches it. So based on the teaching or theory of causality, our suffering is traced back to our own conducts, behavior, which in turn comes from our state of our mind, our motivation. So without having any kind of thought process going on, motivation, you would not act. Maybe there are a few neutral actions which are not so much dependent on motivation as such, but in most cases our actions are dependent on our thoughts and motivation. So the actions which harm others through jealousy, anger and so forth. So with regard to the action, they're killing, lying, trying to be boastful on others, being devious and so forth. All these actions are actions which harm others, and therefore they are considered as negative actions, inappropriate actions. These actions ensue from the selfish motivation, and where you become inconsiderate to others, where you want yourself to be a winner and want others to defeat others. And therefore such unruly state of mind are termed as afflictive thoughts and emotions, which means that no sooner such a state of mind arises in us, they cause us disturbance. For example, if you are angry, you are not happy at all, and the food doesn't taste good, you can't sleep well. So if you become really angry or become really lustful or desirous and arrogant, then these states of mind make you unhappy. So these are called afflictive thoughts and emotions. So such state of mind which make the person, disturbs the peace of mind of the person in whom these states of mind are. These are termed as afflictive thoughts and emotions. So Buddhism teaches that the happiness and suffering that we have, we experience, come from causes and conditions. They don't come from without any causes. And with regard to the cause, there are the two basic causes, which are the karma, the origin, the karmic origin, and then there's delusion. So it is quite natural that we know that we do not want suffering, but want happiness. We do not need anybody to prove that to us. So in order to experience happiness and get rid of suffering, we have to engage in the practices of discarding the actions or which bring about unhappiness or suffering, and which bring about happiness. When we talk about Buddhism, we're not just engaging in intellectual exercises, but we're talking about subduing our mind, because the unsubdued mind causes us suffering. So, of course, we have anger and attachment and so forth. Even biologically, it seems we have this based on our brain. There are cases where these emotions can arise based on our brain. And we think that this is something natural to us, that we cannot do anything about these negative thoughts and emotions. Of course, that's not the case. We have to study and train our minds Of course, knowledge, whatever we learn, they are also related with our brain, the neurons, and so forth. So we can study things and then go through trainings and so forth and become adept at things. So someone who is not knowledgeable can become knowledgeable by studying. And also with regards to Buddhism, because we have an intelligence, a human intelligence, by using this, we should see the long-term benefits and the short-term disadvantages of some experiences. So these negative thoughts and emotions bring us disadvantages. Of course, we need food, shelter, clothing, and so forth. You cannot survive by yourself alone. You have to depend on others. And as humans, we live in as social animals. So, for each of our happiness and enjoyments, we depend on others. And if we disregard others and ignore others on whom we depend, then it's foolish. For example, if a farmer considers his or her field really precious, it's not that they have compassion for their field and so forth, but because they are dependent on the field, they cherish their field. And the nomads, of course, keep animals, and they really take care of them because they are dependent on the animals. And when they need, sometimes they even kill their animals for food. So each and every individual, as humans, throughout our life, we are dependent on other people, other things. And therefore, if we take care of others, be compassionate and loving to others, and not harm others on whom we depend, then it will be better for us. So the best means of cultivating happiness for or benefit of ourselves is that of helping and benefiting others. On the other hand, if we disregard others and if we always try to harm others, then we would have nobody to cherish us. Nobody will even cast a glance happily at us, but run away from us. So, and then you remain alone and lonely and depressed. If you have in such a situation, if you are wearing a diamond ring, you can just kiss it, and so even animals, if we take care of them, if we show love to them, then they show also love towards us. Whereas if we harm them, they do not do so. So many people today, in today's world, are talking more or less about money. In Tibetan, we have a saying that certain actions are like blind yak grazing on the field. So they do not see one side, but only see one side of life. And then they only think of making money, and the result is that they always live in anxiety and fear. Although they may be millionaires and billionaires, but the money that they have do not give them any love and do not overcome their mental problems and give them peace of mind. But to bring about peace of mind, you have to work yourself from within. You have to bring it about from within yourself. And people sometimes consider happiness is somewhere outside. There be good music, pleasant the sights, and good smells and so forth. And then they buy television and watch movies and shows and so forth. And also they indulge in sniffing the good fragrant smells of food and also tasting good food and so forth. But these are only based on sensory perceptions. The happiness that they draw from these are just based on sensory perceptions. And then they can't kill their day if they didn't have such distractions. The happiness people try to draw by depending on the external distractions. So long as the external distractions are there, they find some kind of happiness or pleasure. Once they are gone, then they don't. They have no source of pleasure or happiness. These are very temporary. If you use your mind, then the type of pleasure, happiness, delight, and so forth that you draw from your thinking is not so much dependent on the external distractions. So many people who try to find their happiness in the external distractions, when they do not have these things, then they take to drugs and visiting different places, and when they see different cultures and different food and so forth, go on sightseeings. They are not able to. What this shows is that they are unable to bring about happiness from within their own mind. They are only satisfied. Their only objective is to find happiness through the sensory perceptions based on the external distractions. So, is it the case or not? You can think about it. So, of course, we need external progress, material progress and advancements, but they only give very temporary pleasure and happiness, and which is more or less same as how the animals try to find happiness. Of course, animals are not able to make money, but they can find their food. So if you, of course, have money, then you would have good ornaments and friends and so forth. But those friends are not so sure, because once you become poor, maybe they will not even look at you. So this kind of friend didn't become friends because of their true love, human love to yourself, but because of your money. So it's not. So you get such people becoming friends to yourself based on your wealth. Which is not very good reason to become friends. But friends should be friends when you are in need, a great need. Of course, all of us want happiness. I'm not here talking about future lives and nirvana, liberation, or omniscient state. Even in this one lifetime, we do not want suffering. We want happiness. Although we want peace of mind, we are unable to find the causes for this. We are unable to use our mind, the intelligence that we have as humans. And we are not able to see the long-term benefit of our actions. And we are only lost in the short-term goals. So, by using our intelligence, our mind, we should try to build up happiness, peace of mind. If you are unhappy, physically you will disturb your health because of stress, the internal happiness. We are not able to relax. So you should not have to follow the instruction or advice of the doctors to find peace of mind and have a relaxed state of mind. When we talk about building happiness or bringing about happiness in ourselves, it is not just about future lives and so forth, but even in this life we have to live a happy life. And the source of this happiness is that of loving kindness, compassion, and also seeing that things, whatever experience, bad and good, we have, are dependent on causes and conditions. Many different causes and conditions come together to create these experiences. So if you can see things from this perspective, from the perspective of interdependent nature of things, even if when you are in a great distressful situation, you are not going to point your finger at only one cause or condition. You will not be able to do that. So this unfortunate situation that you are in, you will be able to see that because of such and such conditions, such and such effects have arisen, and because of these, the experience that you are going through has arisen, and therefore there is not no single thing that you can point to and become angry at. Usually, what we try to find is, to point our finger at a single cause, which as the cause for our unhappiness. Most of the different national policies and so forth are based on this kind of narrow-mindedness. I have, of course, President Bush was a really great person, but he made a mistake in pointing the finger at the terrorism happening in the world at Saddam Hussein, a single person. And he was not able to see the broad picture of how many things and causes and conditions have worked to make Saddam Hussein a bad person and so forth. So, because results are dependent on many causes and conditions, you have to see and give thoughts to all these different causes and conditions that bring about a result. I know a scientist. When I met him first, he was about 83 or 84 years old. So he was not a religious. I don't know if he was a religious person or not, but he was someone who did research on psychology, or how people create their problems and so forth. And he told me that when we become angry, the object at which we are angry, we see it's completely negative. And that negativity that we perceive in the person is 90% of it is our own projection. He told me. In our text, there is a mention of inappropriate attitudes, projecting things on attributes on other things, like as it says that the karma and delusions arise from misconceptions, which in turn arise from elaborations, verifications. So, just like this scientist has also told me that 90% of what we project as bad or negative in a person at whom we are angry is our own projection. So when we are angry, we try to single out one cause or condition that has provoked us, anger. But when we are able to see from a broader perspective that many different causes and conditions have worked to for that provocation to happen, then we won't be able to point our finger at any single cause or condition. And then we would say, oh, I see. And if you are angry at somebody, I mean, of course, while we are angry in the heat of the moment, we would be really angry at the person and see the person as being the provocation. But when we are able to give a second thought and find that many different causes and conditions have worked to for that provocation, then we would say, oh, I see, that's not the case. How I've been perceiving the person is not the case, actually. And then you will be able to, your anger will subside. So if you can see things from a broader perspective, then you'll be able to lessen or decrease the negative thoughts and emotions that we have. So Buddhism, as I said, most of the people who live in India have been hearing it, what I have to say. Perhaps you may think that, oh yes, now he's going to say the same thing. And perhaps people would fall asleep because I repeat the same thing over and over again. But for those Tibetans who have come from Tibet, for you, of course, I do not ever say that Buddhism is the best religion in the world. But I say that whether something is best or not depends on how, on individuals, which religion best works for some individual is the best religion for that person. So, on view of that, we cannot say Buddhism is the best, or Christianity is the best, or Muslim is the best. Of course, to whomever Islam helps the best, it is the best religion for that person. And similarly, it goes with Christianity and Buddhism. In general, we cannot say one religion is the best religion. So you cannot also say, how can we say that this medicine is the best? It's not about how expensive a medicine is, whether it's best or not. It's about how effective it is. So to some diseases, a medicine which may be very inexpensive would be best. But to another sickness, and an expensive medicine may be the best cure. So without relating the medicines to the sickness to which it works, against which it works, you can't say this certain medicine is the best. So similarly, it is with religion. You cannot say one religion is the best. You have to talk about the best religion in relation to whoever, whichever individual it is, it helps the best. So with regard to philosophical view, explaining the basis of things, the nature of the things, so forth, it seems that Buddhism seems to have the most detailed explanation. So Buddha himself has said that monks and nuns should not respect my teaching because they revere me, but they should test my teaching and examine it like a goldsmith tests gold by rubbing, cutting, and scratching or burning. And so Buddha has told us to examine his teachings. And then once we find certitude in the teachings after examination, then we can feel convinced about it. We can believe in it.
And with regard to the teaching of the Buddha, we also have the examination of whether certain teaching is definitive or provisional. So we make this distinction of teachings being provisional or definitive. So Buddha didn't say that certain teachings should not be taken as definitive. So whether certain teachings of Buddha are definitive or provisional, we have to use reasoning. If you have to see that if you take certain teachings literally, if there is any damage from this reasoning, then you cannot take such teachings as definitive, but provisional. So you have to distinguish the teachings on through reasoning, to see whether they are definitive teachings or provisional ones. So therefore, the Buddha has told us to check his teaching. Of course, we cannot say that Buddhism is the best religion, but in view of the philosophical thought and explanations, then Buddhism has the most detailed explanation. And then we have the lesser vehicle and the greater vehicle. In the lesser vehicle, the teachings, such as the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, are there, whereas in the Mahayana or greater vehicle, the main teachings are those of the perfection of wisdom teachings. So Mahayana has the basis, as the basis or the foundation of Mahayana. There we have the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, which are taught in the Pali tradition, and then there are points which are elaborated further in the Mahayana. Of course, in the Vinaya tradition, there are many different sects. In the Tibetan Vinaya is the Sarvastivadin tradition, whereas in Sri Lanka and Thailand they follow the Theravada tradition, whereas in China they follow the Dharma-gupta tradition of Vinaya. So there are slight differences, but basically the Vinaya is the same. What kind of vows you keep and so forth are the same. And so the Hinayana teachings are the foundation of Mahayana, on which there are some additional things, such as that of the true cessation and true path are elaborated further in Mahayana. So what we have to overcome in order to attain true cessation, and what kind of antidote are there which overcome these negativities. What is the reason that these antidotes can overcome these negativities that are within us? And it's not only that we believe in the true cessation, saying that, oh, the Buddha has taught this, but we have to use reasoning. So what we are trying to overcome is something which is a fault in the mind. And the antidote that we cultivate is also an attribute of the mind. The reason why this antidote is able to overcome these negativities also has to be thought on the basis of the mind. It's not like switching between two things, physical things. So we have to see the nature of the mind for the reason to see the reason to how we can overcome or correct our mind. We have to see the nature of the mind. These antidotes do not have further antidotes against them which overcomes them. So the mind, which is misconception, is wrong about the reality. And therefore we have to examine what is right and wrong, how we perceive things. And so in Madhyamaka we talk about the things having no true existence. And if that is the case, then the grasping at true existence is a misconception. And therefore it doesn't, it is wrong in terms of the reality. And therefore the mind which sees the reality is that of the mind of wisdom, which sees that of non-true existence of things. So these two, that seeing the true existence of things and non-true existence of things, and seeing or perceiving true existence in things, go against, are like diametrically opposite. So these reasonings actually support the teaching of Four Noble Truths. They don't go against this basic teaching. So in the Shravaka, they practice based on the Four Noble Truths, and then in the Patyaka Buddha vehicle, the practice is based on the 12 links of dependent origination, and then in the Mahayana, we add more on that. And then finally, taking the wisdom into the path, making the wisdom as the path, which is taught in the Nyingma tradition, where they make the distinction of the 9 yanas. All these 9 yanas are for how a single person progresses through the path, through their practice. So Mahayana is something which has additional features on top of what is taught in the Hinayana tradition. And then there is the Tantrayana, which has to do mainly with the subjective mind, which is taught in the 3rd teaching, Turning of the Wheel of Dharma. In the Mahayana Uttara Tantra, it teaches that of the Buddha nature. And then, based on such teachings, then we enter into Tantrayana. Of course, the Tibetan Buddhism that we have is really vast and profound. Of course, Tibetans have great faith in the Dharma, but what actually Buddhism is, people are not much aware of. They are not taking even interest in. After I gave teachings in Bodh Gaya, I went to Orissa Tibetan settlement, and then I went to Baroda via Mumbai airport. And I met an Indian authority at the airport. He said that he was a Buddhist. So I was nice with him. And then I asked him whether he knew what Buddhism is. He said, "No, I don't know." Then I said, "You have to know what Buddhism is. Without knowing what Buddhism is, how can you say you are a Buddhist?" So many Buddhists, many Tibetans say that we are Tibetans, Buddhists. But how you are Buddhist? If you ask, then you just they would just rub their head, scratch their head. And in the Chinese Buddhists, they say they are Buddhists, and they read the Lotus Sutra. And say when they are asked how they are Buddhists, they would say, "Oh, they are reading the Sutra, Lotus Sutra, and making prayers to be born in Amitabha's Sukhavati paradise." So Chinese Buddhists, most of the time they say a certain prayer or a mantra of Amitabha and make prayers to be born in this paradise, and then they make offerings in red envelopes. That's not real Buddhism. So in order to say you are a Buddhist, you have to be able to understand what Buddhism is. And for that you have to study. So Lama Tsongkhapa even says that the purpose of learning is to practice. So many of us seem to be more or less spoiled in the Dharma. But when we say our prayers, we are not really concentrating on the meaning, but just distracting ourselves, looking here and there. Of course, when you get tea, you will be really concentrated, because otherwise, if you would look here and there and hold your mug in your cup in your hand with tea, then you would spill over. So, in such cases, maybe you are very concentrative. In the past, when I was in Tibet, there was when we had the Mönam festival. In the afternoon, there are certain prayers, and there was an old monk from Deyang monastery, perhaps. Then he would fall asleep while saying prayer. So, of course, when we think about the Dharma, we think about taking robes, and then those who are doing philosophical study, they think of more or less, defeating their counterpart in debate. But besides that, they really don't seem to give thought to what they are studying and what they are praying and so forth. Of course, we have to say good words verbally. And then, together with it, we have to think about the meaning of what we are saying. Gongdang Temple Drama says that the old man, the meaning of the text are dependent on its can, walking can, which are the words. So whatever prayer you are doing, like your daily prayers, for example, I have 4 hours of sadhanas and prayers that I do every day. Of course, without while saying the prayer, if I concentrated on the meaning, then of course, while saying prayer, you are not really doing shamatha meditation as such, where you get single-pointedness of mind. But when you really concentrate on the prayer, the meaning, it really helps to draw the mind within yourself and not get distracted. So I usually say is that we have to be today, we have to become 21st century Buddhists. In the past, of course, it didn't really matter. But we should not think that studying the Dharma is the responsibility of the monks and nuns, and especially those who study the great classical texts. So everybody, whether they are lay or people or monastics, have to study. So you have to be able to at least know the basics, the foundations of Buddhism, and then become a Buddhist, having faith in the Dharma through reasoning and understanding. Without that, if you just take the teaching of the Buddha as a tradition and culture, perhaps you may find it's a waste of time when you think about the Dharma. I also said this in Bodh Gaya. I was in the World Conference of the organized by the UN in Australia. So I attended in Melbourne this World Parliament of Religions meeting, and I met two bhikshus from Burma, and they had expressed the wish to meet me. In Burma, there's a really good practice of Vinaya, the monastic code. There was a case where people also became an arhat. When I came to India in 1956, I heard about this person becoming an arhat. Of course, when we study Madhyamaka texts, there is a certain distinction of the arhat according to the Madhyamaka tradition and as opposed to the Vaibhashika tradition, so forth. So, whichever case it may be, this person if someone has, of course, if that person even had overcome the very active negative thoughts and emotions within the desire realm, even that much is, of course, should be good. We talk about the union of in Tantrayana and so forth, but we do not have any single person to point at who has become a realized master. So these two Burmese bhikshus, I was happy to meet them. I put on my yellow robe, showing that I am a bhikshu of the Mulasarvastivadin tradition. So they told me that we are the same follower of the Buddha, but we have big differences. Then I thought, oh, they are not to be blamed to say this. In the 19th, 20th century, Tibetan Buddhism has been called Lamaism. And in many of the Theravada traditions, there is the saying that Tibetans do not have Vinaya. And of course, even within Tibetan society, people consider some lamas who have wives, and when they receive blessings and empowerments, these lamas are considered really highly, whereas a real true bhikshu is not regarded that much. In the past, in Kham, there was the custom of people regarding lamas, whether they are high or not, on the basis of whether they have a big caravan of horses and yaks or not. So, with regard to a lama, we have the different criteria that are explained in the Vinaya or the Sutra, or in the four classes of, according to the four classes of Tantra. So without using these criteria that are taught in the scriptures, we consider certain people who has the title of a Tulku, or reincarnate Lama, as really highly. Whether they are learned or not, it doesn't really matter to people, but the name, the title, the Tulku, matters more. So this is something wrong. So Tibetan Buddhism, of course, has been seen as Buddhism of Tantrayana without having any Vinaya practice. So I thought these Burmese monks were talking from that point of view. Then I said, of course, you are Theravada, following the tradition of Theravada tradition, but whereas we follow the Bodhichitta tradition, which was established in Tibet in the 8th century by Abbot Chandarakshita, who came to Tibet. I'm quite familiar with the Theravada Pratimoksha vows, where they have 227 vows, whereas we have 253 vows in the Mulasarvastivadana tradition. So there are certain differences in the numbers of certain vows. We have in the misdeeds the 112, whereas they have less number. So when I paid really good attention to the differences in the misdeeds, when it comes to describing about the lower garment of monks. In our case, there are many different attributes to how the lower garment has to be worn, whereas in the Theravada tradition, it only mentions one point, which is the lower garment should be worn rather in a cylindrical shape. So when I explained all these things, they were really delighted. And they were quite expressed surprise and asked me, do you really in the Tibetan tradition have the Vinaya tradition? They were asking me like that. So I was able to explain to them. So of course I do not know the details. I wasn't an embarrassment to our tradition. So, of course, I do not know the details. If I have to go through each and every detail of Vinaya, I do not know. But I expressed to them that we have not been interacting between ourselves much, so we have to have more interactions, and so that we can learn and discuss about Vinaya between the Vinaya practitioners. So this year we are planning to have a meeting with the Theravada tradition and the Tibetan Buddhist. So there are lots of things we still are left with to investigate about Vinaya. So we can do we have discussion on these as well. So I wish to say this to the public here. Tibetan Buddhism is a complete teaching of the Buddha, including the Hinayana and Tantrayana. So how it is described is externally we have the Vinaya, and internally the Mahayana, and then secretly we have the practice of the Tantrayana. So this shows that Tantrayana is not something that you jump at right away. So it's very important for us to have a really clear practice of Vinaya. And then on top of that, we, of course, internally we should practice love, compassion, bodhicitta, and the perfections, so forth. And then finally, we should practice that of Tantra. It's not right to be engaged in the tantric practices right away. Of course, when I reached Orissa Tibetan settlement, they told me they have the practice of the Vinaya, the three different basic practices of holding the bi-monthly confession, the that of summer retreat and then the end of summer retreat and so forth. And when I reached there, they had an exhibition of where they had displayed a mask, and I said to them that the monastery that it's not really good to have this kind of display things displayed. I think it was started by the 13th Dalai Lama. They have this the tradition of painting the different activities of monastic. So there are these paintings of how the monasteries should, to remind ourselves of the Vinaya practice, we should use these kind of paintings of how where we hang, to showing where we hang the robes when we are in the woods, and how far we can be from that tree, where we are sitting, if we are sitting in another tree, and so forth. So if we have these kind of paintings depicting the Vinaya practice, then it would be really good. Of course, to have the wheel of life painting in front at the temples is really nice. I've been saying this many times for a long time now, that we have the custom of having the Buddha statue in the temple, and then in front of it we would have really some lamp, which is almost giving lots of smoke, and whereas on the another side of the temple we have something, a room which is called Gonkang, where we have the terrifying or fierce-looking protectors and so forth, and we make offerings of chang and so forth, beverages, alcohol and so forth. And then we think that the Buddha is something, of course, really object of reverence. But we do not have that kind of strong sort of reverence. Whereas when we reach this Gonkang, we have this perception that it is something really, powerful and would harm us if we do something wrong in front of it and so forth, and we become really fearful, even to enter the Gonkang. So this is something wrong that we are doing. So as monastics, we have to be very clear about our conduct, wearing the monastic robe and behaving as monastics. Whereas if you are a tantric practitioner, where you have your own dress, which was started even during the time of Guru Padmasambhava at Samye Monastery, where there were these 4 different departments of the tantrics, monastics, the translators, and the meditators. So this tradition, the tradition of the monastics and the tantrics were established at that time, and was made very clear. There was this great clear distinction. Otherwise, wearing monastic robes and then having wife and children and behaving like a householder is not really good. So in monasteries, if you could have the paintings of the Vinaya practices, would be really good. And for tantrics, if you wear the white clothes established in the 8th century, it would be good. Otherwise, we almost are kicked out of the sect of Buddhism in certain sects. So what we have to do is we have to show to people clearly that we have the Vinaya practice, the external practice of Vinaya, and then the internal practice of the bodhisattvas, and then the secret practice of Tantrayana. So this is, I wished to say this to people here. Please keep this in mind. Many Westerners have come here. And even amongst you, in the centers, you should make clear distinction between the monastics and the tantrics, without mixing the two. Of course, wherever you have monastics keeping the Vinaya tradition, you have to emphasize on it and make it very clear that you have this monastic tradition in the centers, wherever they are. So this is an introduction to Buddhism. Of course, there was the argument that Mahayana was not teaching of the Buddha. Even during the time of the Nagarjuna, there were arguments. And today, there are people who say Mahayana is not Buddha. I went to Taiwan, and there were people who were demonstrating against me, saying that the Dalai Lama is not teaching the real Buddhism, true Buddhism. So even today, there are people who reject Mahayana being a teaching of the Buddha. And then especially that of the Tantra, even today there are people who say that Tantra is something which is Buddhism mixed with that of Hinduism. So of course in India they had all these different non-Buddhist traditions, whereas once Buddhism came to Tibet and it became well established, we almost took it for granted that this teaching that we have. So it's very important for us to know that we have these practices of Vinaya, the Bodhisattva practices, and the Tantra, and not take the teaching for, and we should not be disgrace to the teaching of the Buddha. Of course, in the highest yoga tantra, there is the mention of the 5 meats and 5 nectars and so forth, which are said to symbolize those of the clear lights and illusory body, where you make the distinction between the subtle and gross body, and attain that subtle body and become enlightened. Use that to become enlightened Buddha. And then there is also the teaching of the dissolution of the elements, and finally, which finally dissolve into the emptiness, which is the clear light. So, when you understand the purpose of the realizing these things, then you should know the symbolism of the 5 meats and 5 nectars and so forth. The inner offering is when you make inner offering, you make this offering. You offer it to your deities, lamas, the protectors, and yourself. And then you do the practice of the completion stage practice of highest yoga tantra. And then there's the transformation process taking place through the tantric practice. So the 5 nectars and 5 meats in Tantra have to be explained and, or understood in terms of such practices. Whereas it's not the case that you should drink the alcohol and so forth when you're saying that you are practicing Tantra. And when you ask the real points, you just become embarrassed. You should not be like that. As it is said in the Guya Samaja, the Root Tantra, you have to, of course, without understanding the real point, it is said that you have just to go to believe in the powers of the nectars and so forth. But the important thing is that you have to understand the symbolism and the different transformative processes that are taking place through the practice of Tantra. So the different rituals and so forth are for the purpose of realizing the higher paths, the higher experiences that are explained in Tantra. So it's important to understand, and then when people criticize, you have to be able to explain to them so that you can make them convinced about the real purpose, the meaning of Tantra. So on this day, 2,550-something years ago, Buddha was said to have overcome or defeated certain non-Buddhist teachers at that time through miracles. And therefore, commemorating this event, we have this teaching or telling the story from the Jataka Tales, and which is one of the 6 texts studied by the Kadampa masters. So within the 6 texts there are the Udana Varga, or Tibetan Dhammapada, and this Jataka Mala. So I have received the transmission, commentarial transmission of this from the Gaden Rinpoche, the present Gaden Rinpoche. I didn't receive the transmission when I was in Tibet, so I've been able to revive the teaching of the 6 texts of Kadampa masters. It's been really fortunate for me to have been able to do that. It's the chapter number 22, he's almost reading, the 2 swans. The conduct of the virtuous, even when they are in trouble, is such that the wicked cannot emulate it. Much less can they emulate how the virtuous behave when they are in comfortable circumstances. Thus has it been heard. Once the Bodhisattva was a king of the swans. His name was Dhritarashtra, and he was the lord of the immense flock, comprising hundreds of thousands of swans who lived on the great lake Manasa. The commander of the king's army was a swan named Sumukha. He had a politic mind and a good grasp of strategy. He was also endowed with talent, courtesy, and modesty, steadfast and pure in conduct and character. He was, moreover, brave, inexhaustible, vigilant, loyal, and skilled in various forms of war. It was the noble elder Ananda in that birth. So in a past life, the Buddha was born as a king of swans, And of course, as a bodhisattva, he must have the imprints from his previous lives before that of practicing the Dharma and the bodhisattva, doing the bodhisattva practices. And so the king, the commander of the king's army, was born later during the time of the Buddha as Ananda, the Buddha's disciple. The capability of the king and the commander were reinforced by their mutual affection, as a teacher and his chief disciple do with other students, or a father and his eldest son with the remaining children. So did they initiate their flock into all that would benefit it in both worlds. So there was this unique relationship between the two, the Buddha and Ananda. The two swans were entirely occupied with the betterment of the flock, just as the two wings of a bird are occupied in keeping it aloft in the sky. The sages and the other celestial beings marveled at the extraordinary merits of the two swans. Their bodies have the luster of burnished gold. They proclaimed their speech is clear. Their speech is clear, their modest demeanor and conduct are based on virtue. We do not know who they are. They only bear the shape of swans. The two swans' fame gained credence in the councils of beings, where its accounts were passed around like gifts. At that time, there was a king named Brahmadatta in Varanasi. He often heard trustworthy ministers and Brahmin elders talk in the assembly about the remarkable qualities of the two swans, and this made him increasingly curious to see them. "O men of skill," he said to his clever courtiers, who had studied many sciences, "think of some method whereby we may at least get a glimpse of these two noble birds." The ministers considered virtuous possibilities, each according to his experience. "Sir," they replied, "the prospect of pleasure attracts people from far and near. The news of something excellent which they can enjoy may therefore bring the swans here. Your Majesty, you should have a lake built in some wooded region even more splendid than the one where these beautiful birds are reported to live. They make it known by daily proclamation that you have granted safe passage to all birds at this lake. Such news should certainly excite their curiosity and draw them here. Look, sir, pleasure often turns insipid once they have been enjoyed. Insipid once they have been enjoyed. And people do not care for them. But once lauded by hearsay will always charm the mind, since it is as yet unknown." The king agreed. Within a short time they had a great lake constructed not too far from the city park. Its magnificence rivaled that of the lake Manasa. Its pure and lovely water was full of various kinds of lotuses and lilies. Trees covered with flowers, their foliage glinting in the light, stood around its periphery as if to view the lake. Rocking in its gentle ripples, lotus blossoms seemed to smile, by which enchanted honeybees hovered all around. The water lilies bloomed at night, dappling, as it were, the lake with specks of moonlight filtering through the shade. The lake's wave fingers spread lotus pollen like strings of gold to grace its shores, and lotus petals flecked with pollen seemed like gifts as if of splendor. The lake was adorned by schools of fish whose varied shapes were as clearly visible as its calm, transparent waters, as if they were flitting through the sky. At some place, elephants blew sprays of water, which scattered like pearls as they struck the rocks. At the others, the lake was fragrant with the lotions of bathing nymphs, the rats of elephants, and the pollen of its own flowers. It was all a mirror for the stars and full of merry sounds of the birds. After the lake had been constructed and dedicated to the unrestricted ease and enjoyment of all birds, the grant of safe passage for them was assured through a daily proclamation. The king is pleased to give this lake and its water full of lilies and lotuses of birds to the birds, it was proclaimed. He also grants them safe passage here. The season changed in due course. The dark curtain of clouds was lifted, and the sky sparkled with the glow of autumn. The lakes looked lovely, with lotuses blooming in their limpid waters. The moon shone with renewed brilliance. The earth was embellished with various rich crops, and young swans became active. At this time, a pair of swans came out from the flock on Lakes Manasa, and cruising through the clear autumn sky arrived in King Brahmadatta's country. These swans saw the new lake. It was full of the sound of birds and honeybees. A pleasant breeze blowing over its waters spread everywhere the perfume of the lotuses and lilies, with which the lake was ablaze. How wonderful it would be if our entire flock were to come here, thought the couple. Even though they were accustomed to their own Lake Manasa, and they stayed at the new lake for a time, enjoying themselves at will. The seasons changed, and once having been through many lifetimes, as we say, usually the Buddha accumulated merit over a period of countless eons, during which he cultivated Bodhichitta and remained an ordinary person for many lifetimes. Of course, there must have been times when he took rebirth intentionally. So this shows that all the Buddhas have become Buddhas by going through the training of Bodhisattvas. So in order to make transformation within, go through the trainings, they relied on spiritual masters. And so there is no single Buddha who has not gone through such training and was a Buddha right from the beginning. So in order to become a Buddha, we all have that of what is known as the lineage of the Buddha, or the Buddha nature. So it is said in the Maitreya's Uttara Tantra, because we have this lineage, or the potential, all sentient beings are essentially have the essence of the Buddha. So the Buddha, Shakyamuni himself, was born at one time as this swan, although he was an animal at that time. Because of his habituation with the bodhicitta and the practice of benefiting others and protecting others from harm, and he was born at that time as a swan who was doing such thing. And then the king at that time, the human king, wanted to have these two swans, the king of the swans and his commander, to have these two nearby where he lived. The ministers of the king, of course, suggested to have these two swans nearby the palace by making a beautiful lake, which is adorned by various flowers, so that the favorable conditions for the birds could be created. And when the lake became a place where there was no harm at all, these ones had come there. So in our own lives, we have to be good, live our life in a good way, by not harming others. Of course, people who are our adversaries may do things which are harmful to us, but deep down in our heart, we must not give up on them or try to cause harm to them at all. Of course, we have to criticize their wrongdoing. So if we can cultivate good heart in this life, then in the next lives we can also have make better progress in the next lives. Even as animals, if they lived a good life, then they would be able to purify their negative karmas. And so if we create good karma within ourselves, we would, even if we are born as an animal in the next life, we would be able to have this kind of good attitude, good way of thinking, and our karmas would be purified, and then we would be live only a very short life in that as an animal, and then die from there and take rebirth as in a better life form. Even as humans, we have the sufferings, different kinds of sufferings, meeting with unwanted things and not meeting with things that we desire, and the misfortunes befalling us suddenly and so forth. And so, as long as we have the condition within the samsara, we are going to go through this suffering. So, overcoming all the suffering completely doesn't mean overcoming the things outside, but overcoming the causes of suffering and experiences within ourselves. When you become a strong practitioner, then you develop an attitude whereby you will be happy to suffer, because you know that this misery and suffering would cleanse or help you to overcome your negative karmas. And you would be able to also dedicate whatever happiness you have for enlightenment. And dedicate your causes of happiness and the happiness that you experience for the benefit of all sentient beings. And you can also pray to have this, to take on the suffering of all other sentient beings' sufferings. And you'll be making such prayers whereby you say, through this suffering, may the ocean of suffering for all sentient beings dry up. And when you have happiness, good experiences, then you would dedicate these for the benefit of all sentient beings to become enlightened, to accumulate merit and wisdom, through which you become enlightened. So you should be able to develop yourself to the point where you can also, as it is said in the Lama Chapa, to dedicate your, to take on the sufferings of all sentient beings onto yourself, and dedicate your merit for the benefit of others. So the 6 billion or so people in the world, amongst them, the calmer and relaxed people are, there's more happiness. Whereas those who are, the more people are engaged or indulged in love and hate kind of thing, then there's more suffering. So keep this in mind to live a good life. Now we'll say do the Bodhichitta ceremony. We can use different texts or rites. All of us know the verse of taking refuge in Bodhicitta, which says, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly until I'm enlightened. I dedicate the practices of generosity and so forth to become Buddha or enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings. So this is the verse that we'll say and to take part in this Bodhicitta ceremony. Aspiring Bodhicitta. Of course, all the Buddhas, in order to take part in this ceremony, we imagine the Buddhas in the space. All the Buddhas have equal love towards all sentient beings, equally, without any distinction, whatever race or religion and so forth they have. And then, as followers of the teacher Shakyamuni, they were the Indian masters such as Nagarjuna, his disciple Aryadeva, Buddhapalita, and Nagabodhi, Chandrakirti. So they were primary disciples of Nagarjuna, and then there were Chandrakirti, Bhaviveka, and so forth, who were also his disciples. I wrote a prayer of the 17 Nalanda Panditas, scholar adepts, and we also made the paintings of these masters. We're not talking about how they showed miracles and so forth, but how they studied the Buddhism, the teachings of the Buddha, and practiced them, and which we are also doing. So if we just talk about receiving blessings and the compassion of the Buddha and so forth, that's not so effective sometimes, but when we have the texts that were written by these masters, that we can also study, it makes sense to receive blessings from these masters once you understand them. And then, so we have to imagine these masters of the past, and Indian Buddhist masters such as Nagarjuna and so forth, and then within the Tibetan Buddhism, we have the different orders or different traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. We have a language, Tibetan, through which we can study the entire teaching of the Buddha and practice. Whereas in other languages like English, although there are translations, but still very limited with regard to the teaching. So we have great masters of these Tibetan masters from the different traditions. In Varanasi, some people, Indians and Tibetans together, translated Tsongkhapa's Essence of True Eloquence, the treatise distinguishing between the definitive and the provisional teachings of the Buddha. And one of the translators was Tripathi, Indian Sanskrit scholar. And after he finished his translation, I met him and I asked, since you translated this text, the Essence of Eloquence, I asked him whether Lama Tsongkhapa would be become one of the Nalanda Panditas or not. He said not only that he would be a great scholar of Nalanda, but also one of the top scholars of Nalanda. So I was really happy because I'm a Tibetan, and on top of that I'm from Amdo, where Tsongkhapa comes from, where he was born in Kumbum. So I was from Kumbum. So our birthplace is was maybe half a day its distance by riding on horse. So I was born close to his birthplace as well. So Tsongkhapa and the different masters of all the different Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist traditions of Sakya, Kagyu, Nyingma, and Gelug were really great scholars and adepts. Of course, Buddhism spread in China, but the study and critical study of Buddhism was not there like we have in the Tibetan society. So the Tibetan brain seems to be really good. And of course, the climate is cold in Tibet, and then we eat tsampa, that dough flour, barley flour. So these seems to be really helpful to our brain. So imagine the Buddha surrounded by his disciples and followers like Nagarjuna and his disciples and other Indian masters. Then also the different masters of the 5 different Tibetan Buddhist traditions. Of course, all of these masters have bodhicitta within themselves, whether they have reached a really high level of realization or not. And at the least they have bodhicitta, which is really extraordinary. So they have made their own prayers to benefit all sentient beings and generated bodhicitta within themselves and engage in the different practices to help others. And so the main practice that we have to focus on is bodhicitta. The fact that these great masters were able to help so many sentient beings is because of bodhicitta. And coupled with the understanding of emptiness, they also would reach the enlightenment. So when you practice the renunciation, the taking refuge in the 3 jewels, even if you have some understanding of emptiness, it would really be helpful for these practices. So we have the tradition of doing these practices thanks to these great masters of the past who have cultivated bodhicitta within themselves. And so just have this determination to cultivate and practice bodhicitta as best as we can, just as these past masters have done, and make the prayer or determination to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So just as it is said by Shantideva, we also can make, even if we are not able to reach Buddhahood way, we should still make the prayer like to become a source of sustenance for all sentient beings, like the different elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and so forth. So rather than making the offerings, thousands and tens of thousands of offerings of different gifts to the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, it would be better to, more powerful it is to cultivate that of bodhicitta within oneself. So when you say this verse, you say, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Community until I'm enlightened. You have to think about this I who is making the prayer, and think that this I does not exist objectively from its own side, independently, just as we usually misconceive of it as being in that fashion. And then you also think of cultivating bodhicitta, and through the help of these two, understanding of emptiness and bodhicitta, you collect the two accumulations of merit and wisdom. And first we'll say the seven-limb prayer, the short prayer. So say this. Jabata, Jirang, Guishin, Sowai, Gawa, Jungse, Dagi, Chisapa, Tamjeto, Be Chanchup, Chiringo. I dedicate all this practice of prostration, of making homage, making offering, confessing my negative deeds, rejoicing in the good deeds of all and beings, and requesting to live long, and requesting to turn the wheel of Dharma for the sake of enlightenment for all beings. So please sit crouch, or you can kneel on your right knee or left knee. So please think of the meaning. And when you say this, Sangha, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I'm enlightened. The practices of generosity and so forth I've done, may it become the cause for Buddhahood, for the benefit of all sentient beings. May the Supreme Bodhichitta arise in those in whom it's not arisen yet, and may it enhance further without decrease in those in whom it has arisen. Rigdang tunbe le zamde, gyome zunbe rigdela, nyogbar min gyur tedar cha, jisin namgar ne bata, jowa jisin ne gyur, desi dane ne gyur, dowe donge se war sho. Please sit down. So we have finished with the Dharma discourse, which is part of the Munlam festival. So those of you who are going back to Tibet, be happy and go back happily. As I always appeal to people, it is very important for us to study the teaching of the Buddha. Yep. Kamso Chamba, Temba New Shinto Sewa, Tenze Punu Shinto, Temba Yurin, Epetra Shisho.